Hi everyone, my name is Laura Kissel and I'm the Polar Curator for the Byrd Polar and Climate Research Center Archival Program. Today's collection talk is going to be about Sir George Hubert Wilkins and the Nautilus expedition. In the summer of 1930, Australian explorer George Hubert Wilkins and his wife Suzanne took a belated honeymoon trip to Switzerland, where they stayed at the luxurious castle Schloss Lenzburg, owned by wealthy friend and colleague Lincoln Ellsworth. It was during this 6-week vacation that Wilkins and Ellsworth finalized the plans for what would become the Wilkins-Ellsworth Transantarctic Expedition, also called the Nautilus Expedition. This expedition proposed to take a submarine under the North Pole. Since Wilkins was not a U.S. citizen at the time of the expedition, he entered into an agreement with Lake and Danenauer Incorporated to charter a submarine from the U.S. Shipping Board at a cost of only $1 per year for 5 years, with the provision that the submarine be used for scientific research only. The submarine, called the O-12, had been built by the Lake Torpedo Boat Company in 1918 and was due to be scrapped under the terms of the London Naval Treaty, which regulated submarine warfare and limited naval shipbuilding. On March 24, 1931, the O-12 submarine was christened Nautilus by Lady Suzanne Wilkins under the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge before a crowd of 800 spectators. Due to prohibition, a silver bucket of cracked ice was used rather than the traditional champagne. Jean-Jules Verne, grandson of Jules Verne, author of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, was present at the christening at the invitation of Simon Lake, the original designer of the O-12 submarine. Lake designed many of the modifications for under ice travel, though interestingly, most of those modifications would eventually fail. It was actually Lake who chose the name Nautilus for the submarine, hoping to capitalize on the publicity and the association with Jules Verne's novel. Unfortunately, the Nautilus was doomed with bad luck and mechanical problems from the very beginning. Even before the christening of the ship, the quartermaster Willard Grimmer was swept overboard and drowned in the New York harbor. In spite of this tragedy, the plans for the expedition would proceed. After the christening, the Nautilus underwent more modifications and took a test run up the Hudson to Yonkers, eventually making its way to New London, Connecticut, where she underwent a series of test dives. Finally, on the morning of June 4, 1931, the Nautilus left the United States and set out on its transatlantic crossing. But the following week, the starboard engine broke down and the port engine soon followed. A week later, the Nautilus sent an SOS, and later that day, they were taken under tow by the battleship USS Wyoming. 1 week after that, they arrived in Ireland, and then they were taken by tug to England for repairs. On July 28, 1931, they were finally underway again and arrived in Bergen, Norway on August 5th, where they took on their scientific party. On August 23, 1931, the submarine arrived in Arctic waters, only 600 miles from the pole. At last, this is what Wilkins and the crew had been working for, traveling some 5,000 miles to get there. It was a harrowing several months of travel in the refurbished submarine, requiring numerous repairs along the way. But the weather conditions were now favorable for diving. Unfortunately, when Commander Danenauer ordered a check of the equipment, they discovered that the diving planes were missing. This was a crushing blow and the most recent in a long chain of mechanical problems. Yet Wilkins was determined to continue with the scientific experiments. Chief Scientist Harold Sverdrup was able to work in the diving chamber without difficulty and proceeded to take core samples as well as record bathymetric data and gravity measurements. Scientists determined the temperature and salinity of the water at various levels and collected plankton. On August 31st, Captain Danenauer came up with a technique to take the sub under the ice. He trimmed the sub 2 degrees down at the bow and proceeded under a 3-foot thick floe. Wilkins later wrote, "The noise of the ice scraping along the top of the vessel was terrifying. It sounded as though the whole superstructure was being demolished." But an inside inspection revealed no damage, so Danenauer trimmed down further and continued under the ice. An attempt was made to use the large ice drill, but the shaft failed, so Danenauer had to back the sub out from under the ice. After the expedition, Wilkins had intended to return the Nautilus to the U.S. Shipping Board, but the condition of the vessel made that impossible. Permission was given to sink the submarine off the coast of Norway, and on November 30th, the Nautilus was towed 4 miles from Bergen and scuttled in just under 1,200 feet of water. Although it did not achieve its goal of submerging at the North Pole, it did prove that submarines could travel under the Arctic ice. Many perceived this expedition as a foolhardy publicity stunt, but for Wilkins it was yet another opportunity to be first. The first to submerge a submarine under Arctic ice and map what remained unknown about northern geography. Many letters were written to Wilkins, some encouraging and others discouraging him from undertaking the expedition. Critics called the expedition the Suicide Club, and yet at the same time deals were made with the Hearst Empire to exclusive news rights for the expedition. The expedition even caught the eye of cartoonists Walt Disney and Pat Sullivan. Wilkins never gave up on the idea of submersible polar research. The Wilkins collection has documentation of plans for a second submarine expedition, although it never actually occurred. After returning from the Nautilus expedition, Wilkins went on to partner with Lincoln Ellsworth once again and served as second in command of the Ellsworth Antarctic flight expeditions, traveling to Antarctica 4 times in the 1930s. In 1937, he spent 7 months as the leader of the Alaskan-Canadian section of the search for the lost Soviet polar explorer Sigismund Levinsky. Eventually, Wilkins was hired as a consultant for the U.S. military and worked at this capacity until his death in 1958. On March 17, 1959, the nuclear submarine USS Skate surfaced at the North Pole and scattered Sir George Hubert Wilkins' ashes over the Arctic ice. For more information about the Nautilus expedition and Sir Hubert Wilkins, please visit us at go.osu.edu/polararchives. Thank you for your attention.